and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast, where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Megan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlene, for having me on. I'm so glad a podcast like yours exists for us siblings with special needs.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been so exciting to it's so scary to put it out there, but it's so cool because it we got to meet through this. Otherwise, we would have never met. So it's awesome to how it creates friendships. Can you please tell me about your family structure, birth order, what sibling has a disability, what their disability is, etc.?
Sure. So I have a two-parent family. I have my older brother developed a disability when we were teenagers. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that was like. But it's my older brother who has schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, and then me, and then my younger brother, and we're all about 2 years apart. So we grew up pretty close as a unit. And it wasn't until we were teenagers that really things made a drastic change in our family dynamic.
Me and my sister were 2 years apart, so I'm 2 years older than her. So we kind of have that a little bit in common,
Yeah.
where the age range, you're kind of going through school at the same time and the same similar age ranges, so you're kind of hitting milestones, or what would be milestones, I guess, kind of at the same time. So
yes, and my older brother and I are actually 2 years and a day apart. So we shared birthday parties growing up.
Oh, okay.
His birthday's the day after mine, but obviously 2 years before. But we shared that growing up. We shared a lot of experiences.
Oh, interesting.
And then my younger brother is just shy of 2 years, so he's a little closer to me in age, but yeah, about 2 years apart.
Yeah, me and my sister are similar. Our birthdays are in the same month.
Yeah.
So it's just here, at family gatherings, it's here's 2 cake. When we were really little, everyone got their own cake, and now it's just now we just dump in here's all the other holidays at the same time, because it's I feel once you get into college and after that, no one has time, so you just do one dinner that uncompensates the whole family event.
Absolutely.
So on the show, we like to keep it pretty open forum. People have talked about a variety of things. So what would you like to bring to the table today?
So I guess the main thing I wanted to discuss is what it's like when there is that sudden drastic change that comes as a result of a sibling having a disability that wasn't there all along. It wasn't something we ever expected, or it changed the whole vision of what we thought our family was going to be like and what it was like. And so having a brother, and especially an older sibling who develops a very debilitating disability later in life, it even changed, I feel like, in a sense, the birth order, because he's not able to take on the leadership mantle that an oldest child maybe normally would. We knew there were things wrong leading up to his diagnosis of schizophrenia. There were a couple of really tough years. For instance, he went through periods of drug abuse, homelessness. But I'll never forget the day that he actually came back and said he needed help, and then was checked into a psychiatric hospital, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and that changed our lives. Because it wasn't, it felt permanent in a sense. And I know there are many functioning schizophrenics, those who are high functioning, but in my brother's case, he's not. He only lives with a lot of help. And so it's really kind of changed everything about our family in a sense, and how we function. So that is, that's kind of what I'd like to talk about today, what that's like living with that change.
That's hard no matter how you look at it. Because like, let's, for instance, say, like, he got into, like, a really bad car accident, which I've met people where, that happens, and that's a very big thing, but that's still not quite the same as something being more chronic and debilitating, like, forever, right? It's not like, "Oh, he's gonna be in the hospital for a month and then recover." It's like he's gonna kinda forever in his.
His brain has changed in a way, yes, and it's a real, it's a mental illness. So his brain chemistry is not the same. And certainly when we were kids, um, again, never there wasn't really we we all played, we all, we were close as a family, and so I remember him being a boy that loved animals and loved going outside, and he had pet lizards, and we lived kind of out in the country, surrounded by nature, um, and we did move. Actually, moved from one out of country. We grew up in New Zealand and moved to Canada when he was about not 11 and I was 9. Moved, so that also defines our family. Um, but then quickly those preteen years and him falling in with a rough crowd and the drug use, and leading to the schizophrenia at about I was 16 when he was diagnosed. Um, 15, 16, and he was 17, 18. So, um, yeah, it was some rough years. In one sense, when we found out about the schizophrenia, in one sense, it was a bit of a relief that these troublesome years of our teenage years were there was an explanation,
Yeah.
possibly, for some of his behavior. Um, but it settles this realization that, oh, well, now we have to live with the diagnosis of this mental illness, this disability, and what that looks like. So, yeah, all I can just think of is the word grief. Like there's a
Oh,
grief
yeah.
that comes with, a sense of not. It does feel sometimes like you've lost a sibling, not in a sense that he's still here with us. Thank the Lord that he's with us, but life is not the same, right? It's not, and it's not going to go back to being what you remember. So,
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things where I think even though, like, my sister was diagnosed at the age of 3, so I would have been 5, right? Like, it's not until probably within the last year where I even understood the concept that, like, I have to grieve a sister that I was never going to get. And it's interesting because, like, in that sense, like, you obviously, like, much clearly experienced the, like, before, during, and after as you're experiencing it now, and then so you actually got to, like, I think the understanding the grief part of the situation, I think you have a much more concrete understanding because you got to see it all versus I had to, like, learn to then, "Oh, that is right," like, my sister never got to do XYZ in general, right? Not even like, "Oh, she had the potential," it's just it was almost taken away so early that I didn't even recognize that that was even gonna be a possibility. I was just like, "Oh, it's not gonna be normal," whatever that means.
right. And I mean, we all have different journeys, don't we, as siblings to those with disabilities. But for me, I don't think I had the words at the time. It wasn't until I was probably in my 20s that I really realized it was grief and that I could call it that. Until I'd been in counseling myself, that I realized it's okay. Like grief is not just about somebody who's passed away, but any type of loss. And so then I had a language to put to it. But it did affect me in a way as a 16-year-old, um, in that I actually sunk into a depression myself after he was diagnosed. And there was other things going on in life as there is as a teenage girl, you know?
Like, that must have been brutal. I don't even wanna imagine, like.
A 16-year-old girl, there's a lot going on, a heartbreak and all of that. So, but the diagnosis was part of it. I recognize of me experiencing my first episode of mental illness with depression. It and that was again a lot of self reflection and learning that I am prone, to depressive episodes. And we did discover that there's not only depression and anxiety in my family history, but a few generations back there is a relative with schizophrenia as well. So
Oh.
there is a hereditary link. Um, of course, if you research genes and gene therapy and all, they say there's things that sometimes turn on those genes or turn off.
Oh, yeah, there's all these, like,
And so drug
nuance
use could have
things.
exacerbated, we
Right.
don't know, but it is in the genetic pool for my family. Um, so but anyway, it was, yeah, how it affected me was just that I did sink into a depression of my own at those years. Again, not fully understanding how this was going to change, only knowing that my brother was hurt, right? That's My brother was hurt and in a way that was um, irreversible that we thought, at the time. Yeah.
And I was gonna say, like, that's gotta be, like, so rough, right? Because it's kinda like I feel like at that age too, it's like your whole world is just upside down. Because it's like, well, if he just didn't do drugs, we wouldn't be here, right? There's all these kinda more, like
Who knows? And he certainly could have developed schizophrenia without the drug use, of course, but the timing of it all, there are some studies that show in young people with drug use before the brain is fully formed, it can accelerate things that may have been in his future anyway. It might have brought things on that were certainly there, but kind of accelerated that. So what a time. Some of those years are blurry, but I do definitely remember the with his diagnosis and then kind of the therapy, being asked if we wanted to do family therapy afterwards and researching. I remember researching, what are the chances of me developing schizophrenia, or what are because it is genetic, how does this affect, like, am I, and I just remember searching for resources as a sibling. And of course, there's a lot of resources for parents,
yes,
um,
so many.
but it just felt like there wasn't much as a sibling. So um, I haven't done a lot of speaking out about it for that reason. I guess I'm glad this podcast exists because the siblings are affected too when a sibling becomes disabled or has a disability. We're all in it together, I guess.
Yeah. How was it, like, when your brother got diagnosed and then like, your family's telling, like, your friends and you're telling your friends, like, what was that process like?
Oh, yeah, it was tough because he'd kind of been the black sheep in the family for a few years at that point because of some of his behavior. So we didn't talk about him to family members. And it was always just the kind of, family knew that something was wrong, um, but my parents didn't want to reveal too much. And then I'd say it was mostly in the broader, extended family and friends. Again, that sense of, oh, well, now there's an explanation, right, for some of the behavior. And oh, that makes sense in a way. We didn't, you know, we didn't know what was happening in his brain to lead to some of his behaviors, but it was kind of, yeah. I guess I would describe it as a oh, that makes sense, a relief, but also what to do now. There's just this empty question of what do we do now? That he has this mental illness that is really lifelong, and that's where my parents have struggled through to find the support and resources, and it's definitely been a journey. Getting him disability, categorized as disability income because there's been periods of him having a job, but it's never lasted, and it's um, for him to he I don't see that being in his future as being able to hold a
Just like a
steady
steady
job.
job.
So I remember that kind of process of my parents needing to work through how do we, you know, how does he have income as an adult? And where is he going to live because he can't support himself. He lived with my parents for a long time until moving into a group home situation,
Okay.
and that happened a few years ago.
Okay, so that's more on the newer side of the transitions.
I want to say in the last 5 years. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, that's like yeah, that's fairly recent.
yeah.
Are you able to talk to him, or do you choose to talk or not talk to him, or like what's your interaction like?
So that's a good question. And I guess that's with mental illness. I would love to have a better relationship with him, and I try to reach out, but his schizophrenia honestly prevents him from having meaningful relationships with people. And so, um, even though we live a few hours away from each other, we don't live in the same city. But when I moved out, went to college, went to got married, and started my own family. Um, there was no he doesn't have the ability to connect really over distance, and at least, and so he's kind of shut us out of our life, of his life. um, when I go to visit my parents, I always try to stop by and see him, maybe bring him some food, but often, more often than not, he's resistant and will maybe see me for a minute or two, but won't let me in to his apartment. Won't. There's been a couple of times we've been able to have meals out in a restaurant, and sometimes that goes well, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes he's ordered food and then up and leaving the next thing. And I can't control, his, I can't control him or his reactions. So that's one thing I've had to learn. But his schizophrenia is just that bad that it prevents meaningful contact, I would say. And so, um, some of that is the paranoia, and I think he has feelings about how it was like to have his two younger siblings leave and live relatively normal lives. I'm sure that must be hard on him, but we want that connection, and it's for some reason it's just hard for him to allow it. So that's been hard too. I mean, I have two young children now, and their uncle has maybe spoken to them two words, right? It's
Oh
not.
man.
Um,
Yeah.
he's just resistant to any form of relationship, and that's, I will never stop caring about him and loving him, but I can't force him to have a relationship if that's not something that he can or wants to do. And it's odd because sometimes he does express a desire. Actually, at Thanksgiving last year, he said, "Oh, why don't you call me more?" And I said, "I do. You don't pick up the phone." And I
Yeah.
actually had my parents check his phone to make sure that my
Is
contact was in
in there.
there.
Yeah.
It is, but he won't pick up the phone when I call, or he won't respond to text messages. And I've just learned to say, well, it's too bad. I'll still reach out, but yeah.
Oh
So
man.
that's tough.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking because especially because you grew up like close to each other, right? Like I'm sure the three of you were all together close, but that's so hard because it's like yeah, because you've lost and are continuing to like lose your older brother, right? Who was always there for you, and that's
Right. It is heartbreaking. I've gone through a lot of heartbreak with it, and of course, I've mentioned I've been in counseling for it, and I think that's important, as siblings, that we take care of our own mental and emotional needs. It also makes it difficult when we talk about caregiving because, right now my parents are giving as much care as they can. Again, he lives in a situation where he is provided a couple meals a day, and it's a safe home situation. But in terms of looking after his personal finance,
oh okay.
and managing, taking him to doctor's appointments, the logistics, and so that's become a conversation where we've said, when my parents can no longer do that, will my brother actually allow a sibling to take that role? And so far he hasn't. Um, I don't ever give up hope that things might change. And of course, things are changing in medicine all the time too. New breakthroughs are coming out with mental illness and schizophrenia. So I never give up hope, but it does it there's a sticky situation there of what is going to happen in his future with caregiving. I don't know. I don't know if he will allow us to take a bigger part as siblings. Again, I have a younger brother, um, and so we've discussed this. How who's going to look after him,
Yeah.
and eventually, the answer is unclear. But
And that's something where we all feel that struggle. I think the specifics that you have is that I think yours is more unpredictable just because your older brother is in a mental state where literally I think he doesn't even know what's gonna happen. What happens in the next hour is like not even to his own decision. So it's interesting where that's a battle that we all share, kind of in a similar realm, but yeah, but just like nuances are different in terms of I've met people who they're like across the country, like trying to facilitate things. I've met people where they've moved their sibling to their state, so they've
yes,
had
yeah,
to cross country move them, and then there's kind of people more kind of like yourself in terms of distance where you're not that far away but far enough where and it's such an interesting thing, right? Because in order for us as siblings, to what you were saying earlier, right, for us to take care of ourselves, there is a certain level of physical distance that's needed for us to process all our own stuff, regardless of the grief part, but just our own, right? Regular adults just have issues, and then now we have the compounding of all our sibling stuff, and it's well, without physical distance it's much harder. It's not impossible. I've met people where they live with their sibling and it's fine, but there's a certain level of physical distance that does do good, even though it does make it harder at the same time. It's very catch 22.
yeah. And it's my husband and I have talked about that. Will he have to come live with us at some point? And then, but could, because routine and stability is so important, his support system is there in the city where my parents live. I mean, I physically don't know if he, again, and I don't know if we could get him to move. He tends to get very angry very easily, being part of his mental illness, very fearful, of course, very paranoid. And there would just be a lot to figure out if that were to happen. So, more likely, we would be moving closer to him. But again, would he let us into his lives enough to care for him? I don't know. Or would we need to kind of entrust that to the state? It's tough. Um, uh, all those questions linger. I'm thankful that my parents are able to be there for him now, and he has a fairly good relationship with them now, which is great. To the point where they take him out for food and shopping, and um, probably a couple times a week. The other piece of it being that he's not able to clean up after himself.
Oh
Um,
no.
so that's also been a discussion. Right now, my mother's doing the cleaning in his apartment, and but that obviously won't be able to last forever. So there's even though it's a mental disability in a sense, it does come with a lot of physical effects. He's not able to care for himself properly. So
Yeah, it's kind of like an endless cycle of stuff.
right, yeah. Um,
What's your oh go ahead.
oh no, I'm just thinking about the doctor's appointments again, and how that's regular. And of course, getting him to doctor's appointments, he can show resistance to that. It's not always easy for my parents to get him there, but it's necessary. Thankfully, the medication he is on, it has kind of mellowed him out. But there's always in the back of my mind too, um, uh, a what we call like a psychiatric episode could happen, and that's happened. couple of times since this diagnosis where it's just been completely off the rails. And so again, the reason for consistency, right? And the regular medication taking, which his group home does have a nurse, but there's a medication he has to go to the hospital for once a month, and that's has to be regular, right? So it's yeah. How do you change, when caregiving inevitably needs to change, but you need to keep things the same?
Yeah. Yeah, like, if we had the solution to that, pretty sure this podcast wouldn't need to exist because then we would know.
It's, uh, well, God bless us all because it's not an easy position to be in, but I'm glad there's others who can relate.
Yeah, for sure. I was gonna ask how your husband's interaction, like, with your older brother and, like, kinda yeah.
So when we were dating, I was very upfront with my husband
Mm,
about
yeah, not
the
surprisingly.
situation, you know?
Yeah.
And also knowing that because it's genetic, how does that affect, do you still want to marry me if I have this in my gene pool, right? Um, and it's true that I guess my children are now slightly more at risk
Yeah, they're, like, more
than
susceptible
normal.
to
It's
it.
like 10,
Yeah.
15%, I think. I guess we shouldn't quote me on that, but look it up. But it's, because it's in the family history. We had that very open conversation about what that's gonna be like. Um, I will say, I think, again, just change being hard to deal with for my brother. My brother, change is hard for him. So me getting married, it was, he hasn't opened up a lot to my husband, I will say. It's kind of my husband is the symbol of everything that changed and his,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
another shift and me moving away, right, to get married. I think that was tough. Even if my brother won't admit that, I do believe that's how he feels, kind of that he has not been able to move forward with his life, but he's watched his younger siblings move forward with his life, with their lives. So they don't have much of a relationship. But I will say he was at our wedding, which was I shocking.
Yeah, I was like, that's a win no matter how we look at that, like
I don't know how my parents pulled it off, but um, and I think he even got a haircut for it, which
wow!
like, you know, so I have these couple of pictures of us at the wedding, and I actually have one of just us three of us siblings, and it's very precious to me because it's probably the last, and this is 10 years ago now, the last picture that we have, the three of us, and we all kind of looking presentable, and it's nice.
They have a nice background, you're, like, dressed, not yeah.
Yeah, I hold on to that picture dearly, because that was, yeah, 10 years ago, probably the last time I remember having a very positive interaction with him. So, yeah,
That's nice that you have, like, that memory, though, like, despite obviously all these things that are happening now, like, it's nice that you do have, like, a tangible object that reminds you, like, it is possible and that, like, miracles can happen and no one knows also, like, it's so interesting, like, with the way that, like, technology and the rate of change, like, it's so interesting, right? Because really, like, we're having this conversation now, and even if we had it literally again this time next year, it would, like, be different. It's, like, scary, but it's so amazing for, like, I think for families that really benefit from those practices, like, it helps so much, like, because there's just a level of, like, you can't explain that to other people. Like, they kind of get it because 'cause they're like, "Oh, like, science is great," but, like, it's different when, like, there's something emotional connected to that it gets filled a little bit that you can't like, other things can't fill that place, you know?
definitely. And I just on the unpredictability of it all. I mean, so we live close enough now where I try to visit every couple of months. Um, And probably more often than not, it's been not a great interaction. He just says hi, says bye, and but there has been a couple of times where we've gone and had a nice meal, and he talks like this. I remember this one time last summer where he was very chatty, and I was like, "This is great." He's never chatty, um, but he seemed smiley and happy, and
Aw.
that's those moments keep me going, and that's what fulfills, the hope. That's why I won't lose hope because there's there's always that possibility that, he will have a good day, or um, maybe a medication comes out that will help him more, or, I still have hope that there could be better days ahead. So,
Yeah, and it's like at the end of the day, like your big brother who was like the one you remember, he's in there somewhere. He might be buried under like layers and layers and layers of stuff, but like
no,
he's
he's in there somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, cause even with my sister, like on a good or a bad day, right? It's like at the end of the day, I'm like, you know what? Like she's still my sister, regardless of like the last time I just talked to her on the phone, she was pretty upset. I think it's because I called like at a time that was interrupting her routine. But I was looking at her, I'm like, oh, she's like upset. I was
Right.
like, oh, like I don't want to like force her into it. So I kind of like I told her caretaker, like, oh, like don't worry about it. Like I'm just saying. She's like, are you sure? I'm like, oh yeah, like it's fine. Like I just wanted
Mhm.
her to say hi. I was like, oh, and then at the end, I'm like I feel terrible. Not because it's not like I caused it, but it's just when you see them hurt, it's like it's very interesting, right? Because I think, and I mean, you actually have a real younger brother that's neurotypical, so it's interesting because for me, it's just me and my sister is like my mom used to tell me like, "Oh yeah, as a parent, like you hurt when your kids hurt." But I feel like as a sibling, like it's not it's more similar to the parent-child hurt than the sibling which you're also a parent. So I'm wondering if we can like
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
I do hurt when my brother hurts. I mean, in some way, I've had to compartmentalize it because it hurts a lot, especially when it can feel like a rejection when he won't talk to me, right? When there's no, and so I've had to kind of set that aside and say, um, it's his illness. It's not him rejecting me. It's his illness. It's his disability. But there's definitely been times, and I've talked to my therapist about this, about like I can't constantly live in that place of being rejected by a sibling because it does hurt. Um, I would say it is very similar in a sense, not the same to a parent-child relationship, but it's been interesting. And it definitely did, I think, make me grow up a little quicker. I will say, especially because it being my older sibling, who's sick. All of a sudden I had to take on a new role in my family of being the oldest in a sense. And that's been challenging too. I actually studied psychology in college, and I've always kind of been interested in psychology and sociology and families and birth order, right? And I can't really find, I've never found a lot of information on can a birth order shift, right? A little bit, but it usually talks about when a sibling passes away.
oh yeah, it's not the same like yeah, that's a
It's similar, but not. I mean, he's there, but he's not able to function in the oldest child role. Um, and so that's yeah, I feel like it did have to make me grow up a little quicker and maybe take on more of a mothering sense early. Um, and maybe that prepared me to have children of my own in a way. I don't know. My two children are still fairly young, so um,
no, I'm with you on the birth order thing. That I think once I met other families where I actually got to meet siblings that were in different orders, like it was so intriguing. Like I'm still to this day fascinated by it, which is why like I that's why when I have everyone introduce themselves, I like make sure I hit birth order because that it's it's such a big factor that I yeah, I'm just so fascinated by it, especially because like I'm curious for your younger brother if like you
yes.
both shifted up or you think kind of he
Um,
stayed more in his
in a
regular.
sense, I would say it's really changed from because my younger brother always be the youngest, and so was always treated as the youngest, and so that hasn't changed. Really, he's not a middle child because there's no one younger than him. Um, so I would say his birth order sense has probably not changed. It's just as if we've lost the top of the group of three, right? So Um, yeah, so I feel kind of more expectation on myself. I was the middle. Now I'm having to take on more leadership in the family because my older sibling can't. But my younger brother is still the youngest, still the baby of the family, and even though he's only 2 years younger, but I mean, he's living his own life as a professor at a college, and doesn't have children. So um, that has come into effect somehow in the sense that because I have my own young family, my younger brother who has no children of his own may be better suited to take care of my sibling with a disability because he doesn't have um, children of his own to take care of, right? So there's a sense of sharing. I don't want to call it a burden, but it is. But of course, my brother will never. He's always more than that, right? He's a love, um, but it is a burden to care for siblings. I should recognize
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
And
in this context where we're siblings talking to other siblings, like they all understand. Yeah, when we talk to the outside world, it's like I gotta explain. Yeah, but here it is totally understood what you're saying. Yeah,
so there's a sense where us two younger siblings will be sharing that. But yeah, we haven't talked about it a whole lot within our family. I mostly probably talk to my mom about how it affects us. And
yeah, it's not easy to talk about. Like it's a necessary evil, and the hard part, it's like there's never a good time. It's always it's and someone is always like what I think is fascinating is like everyone in the family is always thinking about it already. But
right,
no one's saying it out loud. But like literally, if you're all sitting at a dining room table, everyone's thinking about it. But like no one, but like someone just has to say it. And then I feel like once it's out there, people are much more like willing. And I also think it just depends on like what I've noticed. It's like a lot of it's on how people's parents interact with that handoff period. Because I've met people where their parents and they're like full grown adults, right, with their own families, and it's like their parents are still like actively caregiving. That I've met other parents who like one or two have passed and that it's already handed over. I've met people who their families in general they're much younger, so their parents are still in a position where they can caregive or they're already looking to it. And it's like, oh, it's so hard because it's like even when I meet other people that are like my age and my sister's age, it's just like how people's parents communicate the plan is like all over the place.
yeah, absolutely. For us, it's just been a slow kind of what do you think and what are you able to handle? And again, I'm fortunate that my parents are able to care for him right now in a very physical sense. But we're in the when we look at what the next 10 years is going to be like, that won't be. We're just right at the beginning of like figuring out what that handoff is going to look like. And Yeah, it's the last 10 years are definitely not going to be the same as the next 10. So we'll see. My parents had just retired a couple of years ago, so that's also allowed them to they're new retirees, and so that's allowed them to be more involved in my older brother's life, which um, was good for everyone, I think, at this stage.
Yeah, and that's good for them too, where they get to like be, you know, just them for a little bit. I mean, obviously, like they're still your brother and you and your younger brother, but like I think it like yeah, like, I think it's just that time and space does so much, like, more than I think I ever realized until I moved away. Because me and my sister are probably somewhere around, like, 700 miles apart,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, we're in the same time zone, but that doesn't negate the fact that, like, I can't just, like, go see her, right? And obviously, if there's an emergency, I can go, but it's such an interesting thing where, like, both her and we happened to move out of where we grew up around the same time. Like, I moved out when I got married, but I was still like a 20-minute drive. Like, that's not that far away. And so she was still at home with my parents. So it was so interesting because we both moved like the same week. So she moved into her like privatized housing group home situation. I moved to another state and my parents were still at home. And so it's this dynamic where like I feel like, from my opinion, like me and her are doing a lot better, like in our own zones, and then my parents just get to do whatever they want to do. So it's been interesting, like in parallel, seeing everyone like do their own stuff because it's like we still have like those hard conversations and topics and stuff like when we have to like meet and like go through logistics, right? Like, and it was funny is not the right word, but it kind of is, right? Like, so it's because she moved, we had to redo like some of her conservatorship stuff, right? So I get this like FedEx thing, and my parents are like, make sure you sign it. At the like FedEx it back to their lawyer that then gives me right. Like it's kind of this ring around the rosy because that's part of it. It's just part of the thing.
It's just part of it, and it's a part that we don't think about a lot, but there's a lot of paperwork
So
involved.
much paperwork. Yeah, I mean, it. Yeah, I remember I saw like when my parents did their living trust or like a special needs and all this stuff. Right, I saw it was like at least 2 to 4 inches thick, and I remember at the time I'm like, whatever. Right, I'm like 18, 20. It's like you're like what? And now I'm like, it's so much paper. Like there's, but that you need it, but it's so much. Like
Absolutely. So after I got married 10 years ago, we did live quite far from my family for a while when we were starting out in work, and probably, gosh, the furthest was about a 12-hour drive, and we've slowly been kind of making our way closer back to family. It feels um, but specifically, the last time we moved was 2 years ago, two and a half. So after the pandemic had started, and I remember sensing a need to be closer to family, and I was like, okay, we need to discuss this with our employer, how because that was hard too when there was this, not only the distance but this forced separation almost of families, and and, um, and it just felt, everything felt so much further in 2020 away. And then my dad had a health scare, and that actually resulted in him retiring early a little bit, and and it didn't I this last time we moved, I remember saying we need to be closer to my family because yes, my parents are aging, and it wasn't at the time a thought that we wanted to be closer to my sibling with the disability, but certainly a kind of that's important too, We need to be, it's like, yeah, a bonus, and we need to start thinking about what's this relationship going to look like in the future, because especially I remember 2020 was such an uncertain year for everybody, right? It's like we didn't know what the future was going to look like, or if there was a future. Some people might have wondered if it was the end of times. I don't know,
it's like
uh,
Y2K all over again.
but we
But
moved in 2021, yeah, to be closer, and so now we're just a couple hours, and I can get there in a day if I need to, and yeah, but, yeah, I guess I'm gradually getting used to the idea that I will need to be more involved in everything, with my sibling and with my parents as time goes by, right? So,
it's such a like hard. Yeah, because it's like you wanna live your life, but you want them to live
yes.
theirs, but, like, you know that the overlap in that Venn diagram is large, so it's like, how do you live your life without being that sister, but you are? Yeah, like, it's so difficult.
And I feel like, um, in my early 20s, I did that. I went off and did my own thing, and I moved across the country for college, and I traveled, and sometimes I miss those days, but, we all have to grow up at some time and kinda settle and realize, um, I don't know, uh, and it's tough too because sometimes I do feel like, "Oh, I wish I could go and move to a foreign country,
I
like,
know, yeah,
and
I wanted
kinda
to do
live
that.
nomadic life." But then you realize there's a sibling at home or nearby that, I couldn't just pick up and leave necessarily because the responsibility's on me now to be involved. Or if it's not on me directly now, will be in the next.
Yeah, you, like, have the inkling, it's kinda like it's like coming it's like the light at the end of the tunnel, but you're like, "Oh, it's just getting closer."
There's some days where I think, nope, let's just go. Let's just move. Let's go pack up and see the world.
Yeah, that's when, like, I go on the internet and I'm like, "Well, how much does a ticket cost to go to this place?" Like, yeah.
I have done that a few times. Um, so it's interesting.
Is there anything else or any other part of your story that you wanted to touch on or bring up or ask about?
I guess just circling back to the topic um, of grief. I guess this this kind of goes into my encouragement, but just that it's okay to allow yourself to feel things as a sibling of somebody with a disability. We need to be okay to give ourselves that space to breathe and to process what we're feeling because our feelings are valid too. Um, our emotions are valid too, and our experiences are valid. And so, um, yeah, don't be afraid to call it what it is. That it is a grieving process of losing a future that you maybe thought you once would have. Right. One of the things for me has been um, realizing, I had many different cousins growing up, and we had a big extended family, and we'd often in the summer all get together, all the cousins and the aunts and the uncles, and have a week at the cottage. But I had to realize with my older sibling, who likely will never have his own family, immediate, never get married or have children, and my younger sibling, who has no interest in that at this point, I had to realize that's not going to be the life for my children, and that's not going to be um, the way I grew up is not the way that they're going to grow up, and it's not uh, like life changes, and that's been hard. Um, but just to allow yourself to feel those things, to feel the sadness, and to feel the anger and the pain, and work through it with someone if you can. It's so important. You need people to talk to, or even if you're just listening to this podcast, know that you are not alone in feeling the way that you feel, and yeah, just to be encouraged to know that, yeah, that you're not alone, and it's okay as a sibling to have those feelings too. That it's not fair, and that it's, yeah. I could probably just ramble on and on about.
And that's okay. That's why I just hit record and I just let it go. Like it's yeah, that's the one of my favorite parts about like being informal is like it's about us like sitting down and having a real conversation because it's so hard to have this conversation with people as a general statement, let alone like people you care about that don't get it. And then there's just so many layers of like as siblings we're so used to I feel this way. This is not the time or the space because these people don't understand. I don't want to go through this energy, so let's just bypass it, right? And that's I think how we start building the habit of suppressing everything, right? Good, bad, and different. Like it's just because it's not about us, and it's like as and unfortunately, as an adult, it that's not good. Like that's not a good practice as a child to then carry with you into your adult life, and that's yeah, that's why I'm also a big fan of, like, go see a therapist, a counselor, go see somebody, right? Like, it doesn't have to be that, but do, like, meditation or something, right? 'Cause it's
Yeah, a big help for me has been writing. I, journal, and if I just need to let out what I'm feeling, I just write, and that's been a good outlet for me because it's it's a way that I can say, not to somebody physically, but to my diary, what I'm feeling, what is going on, what happened when I tried to visit him last weekend, and how that made me feel when he wouldn't open the door, or how it made me feel when he said this thing. We all need an outlet, and it's so true what you mentioned, that we tend to get out of the way because they're the ones that are needing the attention, and are needing the extra help, and we tend to just I don't know, maybe make ourselves smaller. Um, but siblings, you matter too, and your pain matters too. So find that outlet and talk to somebody, or find a way to express how you're feeling, I would say, because those feelings are important.
And I guess technically that is your encouragement. So that's we'll like
Mm,
reverse do it and be
yeah,
like that.
sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, it's all good. Like that. It's I. In all honesty, like however, like it always kind of happens this way where like I ask people if there's anything else, and I think there was one time where someone actually had something else, and then we went and encouraged it. But most people end up just like going into it, which is yeah. That's why I'm like, you know what? It's okay. It's not. Yeah, it's fine. Like there's always so many good. I think there's always good nuggets like that everyone has because it's so validating to know that like other people care about us and like we matter and like there's a certain level of like I didn't know that other people had this experience because you just never meet these people or like wait we don't like talking about it.
That's true. I mean, I don't think I've met or had a conversation with somebody who's had a sibling develop schizophrenia in the way, that my brother did. I've known other parents who their children have developed schizophrenia, and that's through my parents, through my mom, finding friends who had common experiences, right? Um, but I can't say I've met a sibling I've connected with on that level until, I mean, now we have this community that you've formed of beautiful siblings with people with disabilities. But that personal touch, it can feel very lonely at times being a sibling of somebody with a disability, especially the specific one that my brother has. So yeah, thank you for forming this community in a sense. And
Thanks, and yeah, and thank you for sharing your story. It's nice to well for me to meet someone where your sibling it's different than like my own sister. So that's like an aside. But yeah, I really appreciate you like sharing your story and your journey, and thank you for being on the podcast.
oh, perfect, that's great timing. I'm sure my kids will be getting home from school any minute, so the timing worked out.
Thanks for listening to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. I hope you had a good time listening and feel encouraged in your own journey as a sibling to someone with special needs. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you want to hear more stories, please subscribe to the show. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, the show can't happen without you. All special needs siblings have their own unique stories, challenges, family dynamics, and lots of life to talk about and explore. This podcast is here to let you know that you're not alone and that you matter. If you would like to be on the show or just chat off the record, please contact me. My info is in the show notes. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.